Okay. Welcome to Eat, Play, Love series. I'm Sandra Leah, Director of Education and Patient Advocacy. Meet my co-host, Rachel Atkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, Director of Strategy.
So Rachel's coming in from Newfoundland in the East, and today our very special guest is Dr. Michael Lyon, who's joining in from British Columbia in the West. So we've covered all of Canada today. We actually have an announcement to make today. We've changed our name from Obesity Action to Obesity Matters. Why? Because it doesn't matter what size you are. We believe that the disease of obesity matters. We believe that you matter. And this is incredibly close to us. It doesn't matter what people think of you. You deserve a voice and you deserve love. No matter your shape, your size, what really matters is you. Together, we want to create a community of enlightened and connected people who nourish, love, and accept our bodies and can advocate for public policy and environmental changes that enable well being. The Eat, Play, Love series is brought to you by Obesity Matters and our collaborators 905, the Raptors 905 and A&A Clinic Research. In this episode, we will talk about the unapologetic pursuit of deliciousness. We'll talk to Dr. Michael Lyon. So, Michael, welcome. Thank you for being here today. We want to learn a little bit about yourself, your practice, the why and how you got into obesity medicine, and your personal journey to this place.
Sure. Well, it's a long story, so we could have a few days to really go through it in detail because I'm in my 60s now. But if we want to make the version as short as possible, I I started off had a bit of a rough beginning. My mother, I believe, had diabetes because back in the day, you probably didn't really look for gestational diabetes, but my mother developed diabetes in her life quite young, and I was born about 12 pounds. And of course, that was a difficult delivery. Apparently, the doctor lost his medical privileges for the way everything went because I was born quite distressed. They thought that I would probably be neurologically impaired. But anyway, somehow I managed through, and but I was pretty heavy to begin with. If you saw pictures of me as a baby, if you would have put a cigar in my mouth, I would have looked like Winston Churchill. Um, but in any case, I grew up as a heavy kid, and apparently my mother always told me the only thing that I wanted to do from the first breath was to eat, and it was day and night. And so I grew up with quite a healthy appetite. And my mother also was a gourmet chef, and she ran a catering business. So we had two refrigerators, one big commercial refrigerator, and at least four freezers in the basement. And we had meals that were often the things that she would make for these great dinners. And she used to live, like many of us, I think, in families where mom lived to see us enjoy her cooking. And so that really made it tough for me to um, to not end up having a pretty large body size as a boy. But back in those days, back in the early 60s, that wasn't really something that was common. And so where I lived in a little city in Saskatchewan, I don't recall seeing any other kids heavy like me, and I was teased all the time and picked on and teased. And on top of that, I was born with a defective heart valve and an arrhythmia in my heart, probably because of the diabetes, my mother's pregnancy, and so on. And and then, to make matters worse, she smoked probably 2 packs of cigarettes a day through her pregnancy, which was pretty common back then. They didn't really know any better. And I was born a nicotine baby. I know because when I was 9 years old and I was in the backyard with the babysitter, he handed me a cigarette one day, and right away I knew that's what I wanted. And so I started to seek ways of getting cigarettes, and I started smoking. By the time I was in grade 6, I was about a half a pack a day smoker, which wasn't great when you had asthma. And I'd been to the hospital 3 times, nearly died from asthma attacks. But in any case, it was the only way I could be a kind of a big shot at school, giving away cigarettes and being the kid who could smoke and so on. And then I got teased a lot and bullied. So I learned how to scrap. So I got in a lot of fights, eventually took karate lessons. That was the first time that I did anything kind of physical because I had to defend myself. But when I was a teenager, a young teenager around 13, I got pneumonia, which isn't surprising because of the smoking and the asthma. But I ended up with pneumonia and got very sick to the point where initially they thought I had tuberculosis because of the x-rays. They wanted to admit me to, they actually had a sanitarium. And that was back when we had moved to Calgary. So they had a sanitarium in Calgary, and I spent half a day at the sanitarium going through tests to see if I'd be admitted to be kept there like a tuberculosis patient. Eventually I was discharged, but had to go into the regular hospital and spend several weeks, and ended up for the first time losing weight. So that's my weight loss plan, is nearly dying and recovering from pneumonia. And when I went back to school, having lost weight, I was treated like a person for the first time in my life. And I remember that sort of sparked this desire to not gain weight. I knew it was about my weight, and I knew that I had to do something. And so initially it was kind of a selfish reason. I just wanted to be able to be a real kid and to be a person and be accepted. But I started getting an interest in nutrition through that, and started to get an interest in health. Ended up quitting smoking. And, within the next 3 or 4 years, I had become kind of a health food nut, and had started to read books from health food stores and started to try different diets. By the time I was 16 or 18, I decided I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to help people with their struggles. And so really it's been my passion to be sort of a doctor with a different perspective when it comes to people who are struggling with their weight. Because as you might imagine, being a heavy kid, it means my body believes I should be a lot heavier. There's a set point that was somehow set inside my brain that says, no, you don't need to be this weight. You need to be a much greater weight. And your body's always sort of putting you under this pressure. And so I've had a lifelong struggle with weight. And initially, being kind of naive and believing a lot of the hype that was out there, I tried a lot of crazy diets. I think I've tried every diet that's ever been invented, and pretty extreme diets, and some of them that are pretty popular now, I have a pretty different perspective on. Like, for instance, when it comes to fasting, I was the master of fasting back then. When I was in my early 20s, I'd got to the point where I was doing intermittent fasting really seriously. Like I would eat nothing at all once a week. So that was one of my plans: no food once a week. And then I would restrict my food to a certain number of hours per day. And it was all about restriction, rules, regulations, restriction. And I went on lots of different kinds of fasts for longer periods of time, different cleanses for 2 weeks at a time with juices and lemon juice and things like that. And then I did a 21-day water fast. That was the pinnacle of my kind of craziness when it came to dieting, a 21-day water fast. And boy, it worked. I lost 36 pounds. And a lot of that would be muscle and water, but nevertheless, I lost 36 pounds. And then I regained 75 pounds in the next year. So anyway.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Sorry to cut you off there. It was just, I think that kind of yo-yo dieting really resonates with so many of the people in our audience. Certainly it does with myself. Do you think that's actually a result of maybe an abusive relationship with food?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of correlations between abusive relationships between other people in our life, because relationships are relationships. We have relationships with people, we might have relationships with pets, you might even have a relationship with your car, for instance. So we can talk about how you relate to others, and when it comes to food, it's a very intimate thing in our lives. You think of it as, what other thing is as intimate as food? You actually, you take it into your body and it becomes part of you. I mean, it's really the most intimate thing there is. And so, yes, we have a relationship with food. And in a way, it's kind of like this person in our lives that feeds us and nurtures us. And that's what it's there for. It's there to feed us, nurture us, and comfort us. But the problem is that, and I knew this because I had a relationship with food where I loved food. I mean, I just loved food. I just kind of lived for food. And yet food didn't love me back. Food I would eat in a way where food would punish me. It would hurt me, and I would feel terrible, and it would harm my health. So it was very much like an abusive relationship. And going through the process of recovering from that, dieting was something that really didn't fix it. It was really a way of pushing it away and letting it come back with more vengeance is what it was, right?
Mhm.
So having, for instance, I for sure had a binge eating disorder. I remember growing up, and I told you we had these big freezers. Well, along the front of the freezers were big pots of commercial ice cream, because my mother would have to put on these events and have ice cream. And so we had it was just like an ice cream shop in our home. And there was so much ice cream that I could go downstairs after dinner, and after having overeaten, like maybe 5 plates of food oftentimes, and a dessert. And then I would go downstairs and I would have a spoon hidden under the freezer, and I would secretly eat ice cream until I could hardly move. And that would be a habit it would almost be a daily thing. So the thing is, when you have a relationship with food like that is really very hurtful, and where you're locked in this kind of prison of abuse, then restrictive diets really, there's something you have to be very careful with, because they tend to work in the very short term, but in the long term, it's like that abuse comes back even worse.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like certainly that would have been my dream, I think, as a child, to have an ice cream shop in my, in my basement somewhere in my house. Wow. And so you touched on, a bunch of different diets. Why do you think they fail in the end?
well, it's of course, there's the underlying physiology of obesity. When you gain weight, your body remembers that weight, and that's what it considers your normal. And so there's powerful hormones there to regulate your body weight, so that you eat as much as you need to maintain your current weight and a bit more. That's part of the growth um, regulation system. As you're growing up, of course, your body temperature stays the same throughout your life, and many things are the same as when you're born, but body weight, of course, has to change. And your body has to be very good at recognizing what your body weight is. And you don't want to eat like a 3-year-old when you're 25. You have to eat like a 25-year-old. So as your body weight grows, your body recognizes your new mass, and it has to eat appropriate for that new mass. And the problem is that system continues to expand in terms of what your body believes your weight is, as your weight gets higher beyond healthy weight. And so that becomes your so-called set point. And there is a lot of truth that there is both a neurological change inside the hypothalamus of the brain. It's like the circuits will actually be reordered to say my body weight is this, and then the hormones change so that as you're living your day, your body will be compelling you to eat a certain way because of its desire for you to be at least the weight that you are now. But because of the way it's set up for growth, as you're growing, you need to eat a little bit. You need to eat as much as you need to maintain your current weight as, say, a child, but a little bit more to add to growth. And that system remains with you through life. So even if you're a normal weight, a healthy weight as an adult, there's still going to be this tendency to gain a bit of weight as you get older, because that's the way the system is designed, to fail a little bit on the fault of the side of that you've eaten a little bit too much today. If you didn't eat enough today, you'd start losing weight, and that would be really quite hazardous over the long term. It would be hazardous if your brain was set up so that you would eat a little bit less than you need every day, a little bit less than you need every day. You'd eventually like get so skinny you could end up getting very sick or die, right? So the system is set up to make sure you eat what you need to support your normal body weight, which your body generally believes is the most you've weighed. It's a really nasty system, but it's a system that it's not like you can't overcome it to some extent. And that's essentially what we're really want to talk about today, is how do you grapple with this? How do you grapple with this food that it compels you to eat, and it's there to give you comfort, it's there to give you joy and pleasure, and yet it can be like an abusive relationship where you eat in a way that it hurts you, where it makes you feel poor, and it harms your health. So
Yeah. So I want to pick up on that abusive relationship, because I do relate to that so much. And so how do you help your patients cultivate that healthy relationship with food?
Well, and again, I'm not saying that it's never, there's never a time to go on some sort of a structured diet to work on weight loss. You know, if your weight is, you know, if weight is a really serious health problem, and you know that you need to reduce your weight, you may need to at some point, or at different intervals, work on losing weight. But we, in our clinic, we try to separate um, the what we call an intervention of weight loss, where you're actually saying, okay, from this period of time to this period of time, I'm going to work on weight loss, because that becomes sort of a special event. It might be, you know, a month or two or three that you're going to work on weight loss, but then the most important thing is in the long term that you don't go back on a restrictive diet. You go back on a diet that's going to be a loving, nurturing relationship with food, instead of a relationship that's continually based on restriction and rules and regulations. That's kind of the main idea, is that to build a healthy relationship with food in the long term is the biggest thing when it comes to healthy weight. Because, you know, most people, if they really put their mind to it, can lose weight, but it's how do you keep that weight off long term? It's not going to be possible generally through a diet that's all about rules and regulations and restriction, because that's what got you here in the first place.
Exactly, exactly. And I want to pick up on the theme, the unapologetic pursuit of deliciousness. So my background is Italian. So this is the way we grew up. It was always about what can we plant in the garden? What are the freshest cuts of meat we can get directly from the farm? How can we use, heat and oil and salt and just what was available to us to make food that was extraordinary? Can you tell us, for someone, especially someone who's dieted their whole life or not a great cook, how do they begin?
Well, I mean, I'd love to reflect a bit more on your your starting point, that in a place like Italy, traditionally, food is a celebration. It's one of the most important sort of central places to celebrate life, and as a community and as a family and as just as Italian people, food becomes an incredibly important part of just their enjoyment of life. And then you see in that culture, traditionally, there was no obesity. There just, it was very unusual. And that's true of many traditional cultures. And that's, kind of brings me to where this concept comes from. And that is, rather than having people, when they come to our clinic, it might surprise people that we don't have, sort of the diet of the diet that's like the magic diet that's going to fix you, and it's not like we're against diets. Like, people might come in and they're on a low carb keto diet, or they might be, following a vegan diet or whatever, but you weren't going to try to talk them out of their diet. But the whole idea is that diet, rather than being something that is like a punishment, or something that's restrictive, or something that where you have mostly kind of loss of control when you eat, we try to go back to the original way food has been part of human life for so long in many, many cultures, and that it's a celebration of life. And when we talk about diet, we say to people, we're going to take you on an eating adventure, where we're going to travel the world, and we're going to discover new flavors and to experience new foods that have been developed over centuries and embraced by cultures that have had good health for centuries. And we're going to fall in love with food in a completely different way. And then you're going to get to the point where you love food more than ever, but you have a real loving relationship where food loves you back, where you finish a meal with after eating an appropriate amount of food, and you feel satisfied in a different kind of way. It's a different kind of satisfaction than when you eat, say, a fast food meal, and you've been satisfied just on the sensual level. You get satisfied to the marrow of your bones when you eat food that's real food, that's made with real ingredients, that's made in a way that gives you this satisfaction of, I don't know, good nutrition and wellness at the same time. So that's kind of the idea, is that we're kind of drawing from wisdom of the ages, from cultures that have a lot more tradition and have especially culinary tradition that has been actually a very important part in keeping those cultures very healthy. And we can, look specifically at certain parts of the world that are regions that have unique longevity. For instance, you probably heard of the blue zones. There's 5 areas that have particularly been identified as having cultures that have promoted such good health, that these are people that have extraordinary longevity compared to other parts of the world. And you can sort of look at their cuisines and say, well, what have they been eating? Because that's part of the formula for longevity, and not just longevity, but this vibrant, enjoyable life that they have in these places.
And I find it very interesting that blue zones don't have the diet mentality. I know one of them is Sardinia, and I'm from Southern Italy, and the other is they don't even have gyms. They're like all about you walk wherever you need to go, and that's the exercise you need to be healthy.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. No gyms. Michael, I've heard you mention a couple of times that, having some skepticism around these really highly restrictive diets and things like, fasting, although we see something like intermittent fasting it seems to have so much momentum. There's a lot of people that are doing that and seeing what I guess they feel is success. So why is it that you're skeptical about these highly restrictive diets?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a specific example, the obesity code. Jason Fung, he's an Ontario kidney specialist who's now made himself to be the world's foremost expert in obesity, but he doesn't talk to any of us who are actually in the obesity medicine field. Interesting. He's like completely outside because he thinks we're a bunch of wonks, a bunch of idiots, because he's cracked the code for obesity. And it's really simple. It's like, don't eat any carbs and do intermittent fasting, and it's fixed, right? There's nothing to it. Well, I would make one very strong prediction, and that is Dr. Fung never sees a patient for more than, at the very most, 2 years. Because after he sees patients for 2 years, he'll see that they all go back to the way they were with that program. I mean, 99% of them will. It's just, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with what he talks about. You can definitely follow a low carb ketogenic diet, and it can be done in a very healthy way. Intermittent fasting has many scientific merits that say it's a really good idea, but it's not really necessarily about that. It's about, number one, the most important part of any diet. If you want a diet that's going to be useful long term, it has to be something that people can live with. And if you can't live with it long term, unless it's, you could use that maybe as a short-term weight loss strategy, that might be fine, for say the next 6 months, you're going to follow a low carb ketogenic diet. And if it works for you and you're seeing success and you're doing it in a healthy way, all the power to you. But in the long term, it's probably not a sustainable strategy for most people. It's just too restrictive. And then the problem is that as you start to deviate from the diet, we've seen this over and over again in our clinic, because we have about a third of our patients have diabetes, and they followed his diabetes code or his obesity code. And then within a couple or 3 years, they come back in, and now their hemoglobin A1C is, the average blood sugar is way back up again, but they don't believe in medication anymore. They've been taking, they're off all their medication. They did well for a while and they were off their medication, but now, because they've started to deviate from the strictness of the diet, as soon as you do that, the whole thing falls apart. And now they're left with no foundation that actually really works. And they're really messed up, because in their head, they believe they know the code, right? This is the code worked for me, but if it doesn't work for the rest of your life, then it's probably not a very useful code. And that's my argument with it. I don't have any scientific arguments with it. I think it's got some very strong scientific merits, but people just don't tend to live by others telling them what to do that they really don't want to do. That's built into human nature. Mm-hmm. And so, instead, some of this reflects on me. Like, what did I have to do to get to the point where I have, where my struggle with my weight is relatively minor. Like I may have a bit of weight that, I deal with, say in the winter, I gain a little bit of weight and I work on losing it, through the spring or something, but it's not like it used to be. The struggle is so different, because I have such a loving relationship with food now that I rely on just on what I've done that really works, that is something that I truly enjoy. That's not just enjoyable, but it's also not, the sustainability isn't just about enjoying it, but the sustainability is about its convenience. It's about when how many nights of the week it's like, oh man, I don't feel like cooking supper. My wife and I, we share that responsibility. I cook one night and she cleans up, and then or she cooks the other night and I clean up. That's our routine, especially with COVID, when we're both at home, and it all is fair. But there's some nights where both of us are like, I don't want to cook anything. Well, now we have a system worked out where we have so many things that we've prepped in advance that we can go to the freezer, just pull something out and put it in the microwave, and we got a meal. You maybe make a quick salad, and that's it. So convenience is a huge part of this. Some of it is really skill building, because if you don't have the skills, if you don't know how to make a vegetable taste delicious, how can you be expected to eat more vegetables? You've got to have vegetables that taste spectacular, like just that are like so delicious. You don't care if you eat anything else but vegetables, because they're so good, like that's the thing. As I grew up in a home where my mother was an amazing chef. Like, she could cook delicious food, but it was not most of it very healthy food. Those are back in the days where, dessert was a jelly marshmallow salad, that kind of thing, or maybe a wiener, like a wiener jello salad or something, right? Now, that was some of the gourmet stuff back then. But in any case, I find that I need to have a couple of things. I need to have food that's really delicious, and I need to have a stomach that's really full. So how do you do that without overeating? Well, vegetables. Vegetables are my most important thing in my life. Absolutely the most important thing in my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to develop that better relationship with food that you're talking about. I know that you have an amazing peer support program in your clinic. And I was curious if you could tell us like what that looks like. I'm assuming this is also another way to really help build that better relationship with food. So what does that look like? And how do you see that helping your patients?
Well, like a little bit of history, I started the clinic maybe 12 years ago with a dietitian. And both of us realized as we were doing this that there were a number of big gaps. And then at some point we realized, people don't know how to cook. If they don't know how to even cut a vegetable or make anything that's healthy, how do we expect them to do the kind of things that we're trying to get them to do? Like, it's not going to work. It's like where the rubber meets the road, you would say. You think, oh, medicine is all high tech, and doctors are trained in the science, and things that are really fairly complicated. But the reality is, when it comes to managing significant weight problems, some of the places where the rubber meets the road are actually not what you think of medicine. And that's where we realized that we had to basically learn how to cook ourselves in a way that we could teach others, and where we could transfer that knowledge to people in a compelling way. So we started to actually do courses from Harvard Medical School. They have these fantastic programs called culinary medicine programs, where they have doctors and dietitians go and learn to be chefs. I actually went to chef college in Napa, California, at the Culinary Institute of America, and it was like life-changing for me, because I grew up, I could hack a few things together and make some things taste edible, but I have to say that I wasn't really the one that people look forward to cooking a family meal. But after a few exposures to that kind of thing, I was, going to chef school, learning the basics, like I had no idea how to even hold a knife or cut a vegetable before I went there. And then I came back, and it started to become this passion that I wanted to learn more and more. How do you actually learn how to like make food that's delicious, that's still really healthy? And it's, it started with that. And so as the years went on, we started to transfer that into our clinic. And we have in our clinic 2 big classrooms where people would come, and one of them was set up to be in the corner. We had like a demonstration kitchen, and we would do these food demos. And back then people would actually get to taste the food and it worked pretty well, but now with COVID, it's all gone online. So we basically have even expanded that. We have what we're starting to call the Healthy Kitchens Academy, where myself and our main dietitian and quite a few of our staff who are trained in nutrition. And the great thing is we have people from all around the world working at our clinic. So we have the chance to have people that can teach us about South Asian cuisine and Asian cuisine, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Thai, that sort of thing, Mediterranean food. And these are things that make it really interesting and fun. So we just finished a series called It's a Small World After All. And it was a series where we had demos of how to make food from different parts of the world. We have lots of classes on, just basic food planning and preparation and so on.
Wow, that is so impressive. I can see the chat box asking Obesity Matters to put on some cooking lessons. So we might have to take some direction from you. Obesity Matters is a new organization and we want to be there. How can we help your practice and your patients?
Well, I think that there are so many good resources already available. That's one of the things that, I want to say. I'm not here to promote anything that I'm doing. And I think that one of the greatest things that you could do is to help people get linked up to some of the best resources that are already there. People are like chomping at the bit saying, how do I do this more? Then there are really some wonderful resources. I have to say, I've become almost like an obsessive consumer of some of the things available on the internet that like say YouTube. There's some amazing people on YouTube that teach you how to cook and give you the secrets to making, a delicious salad, or how to make a stir fry, that's just, better than a restaurant kind of thing. So those are things that, I have a few resources I could share if you wanted me to. I have some of my favorites that
yes, please.
Or maybe what I'll start with, I'll say, I told you, I've done some time at chef school. I've done actually a few courses like that. But one of the things that helped me the most in learning how to make healthy food at home, because it isn't all about sort of how do you make this recipe. It's all like, how do you make a meal? How do you actually compose a meal and use the ingredients that you have? Well, I would say probably the best bang for the buck for me was to start using one of those meal delivery services. I've used 3 now. I've used HelloFresh and Fresh Prep, which I think is just a West Coast one. And then there's one called Good Food, which I believe is out of Quebec. And the thing that's really cool about that is it costs about $12 a serving for the meal, which you think, well, that's a little expensive for dinner. But if you think about it, there's a couple of things. One is there is no waste. You get, you're going to eat everything. When you go to the grocery store and you buy food, especially produce with good intentions, just think of how much you end up throwing away because you don't get at it and cook it in time, and then it goes bad. So that ends up being just wasted money there. Whereas when you have a food delivery service, you're going to eat the whole meal, right? You're going to eat that whole meal. So that's number one. The other thing is that it's a way of exploring the world and exploring new flavors that you've never even heard of. I can't imagine how many different things I've learned by having these food delivery services. And then what you get is you get these. I'll show you one of the cards. This is a card that is this is a HelloFresh one, but there's a Good Food one. There's also I'm not trying to promote anybody's company, but
can you
just
lift them a little higher?
Oh yeah, so there's a HelloFresh card. So with the meal that comes, most of the stuff's already, like, you get the ingredients cut up for you. Some of it you have to cut, like you might have a potato and you have to cut it yourself, which is fine. They do some of the work for you, and then so you have the ingredients there and what the meal looks like, and then you have on the back you have the recipe card.
Wow.
And you get this great recipe card. And what we would do is we would cook the meal. That wasn't the best example. It was a burger. We realized after a while, you got to be careful what you pick, because there's, I don't really want to pay them to put a fancy hamburger together for me. I can do that. I don't really want to eat that many hamburgers, but anyway, it was a chicken burger, so it was okay. But you basically get here's one, West African West African peanut pork. Like I
Mm.
would have never thought of making that in a million years. And yet what an amazing dish. So what we would do is we'd see at the top there 5+. See that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you
So
rated it
yeah,
yourself.
so you make the meal. It's got this great, how to make it thing at the back there. You make the meal, and when you're done, it's like some of them are just like, whoa, that was so good. If I ate that at a restaurant, I would eat that every time I went to that restaurant. It's so good, and it was so easy, and the ingredients are like no brainers. Like you can
And
get
then I
all
would
these things.
imagine you could save the recipe card and make it at a later date, even if you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
turning to
So
them.
literally, after a few months of doing this, I have like a whole binder full of these things, right?
Wow.
And they're all rated. So this is like the best recipe book I've ever got in my life is that
Yeah.
one, because it's all the meals we've made. And then, when you feel like, oh, it's just getting too burdensome to cook like every night, then go back and do it for a few weeks again. You can cancel it anytime.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not here to promote anybody's company, but I just have to say that was probably the single biggest breakthrough in our home in terms of
Wow.
of actually making meals that were like amazing, and it got us sort of in this creative mode. And now every night for my wife and I, it's almost like a little competition. It's not a competition, but it's sort of
No,
this kind of fun competition where, she makes something and I'm just like, whoa, that was so good. That was
I
so
love
good.
that. I
And
think we've made everyone really hungry. So let's move on to Q&A question time.
sure, yeah.
The floor is now open for questions. We will alternate between live questions and ones in the chat box in order of relevance. We encourage you to turn on your camera when you're ready to ask your question. Introduce yourself. Let us know where you're tuning in from. You can virtually raise your hand within the Zoom feature by hitting the participant button, finding your name, and there's 3 buttons. You can raise your hand that way. You can also raise your hand by turning on your camera and raising your hand. And of course, there's the chat box. So I don't think we have any hands raised at this point, but I'm going to turn over to Rosie because that chat box has been going non-stop.
Great, thanks so much.
I think that was Elizabeth. Elizabeth raised her hand, but I'm not sure. She just raised it this way. Elizabeth, did you raise your?
Oh, I didn't see. Oh, I see. You caught that. Good. Elizabeth, did you want to go ahead?
Oh, I guess not.
Maybe she was scratching her head. Rosie, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment and a question that I'm going to combine on the same topic. Michelle McMillan says, "Thank you for the growth explanation for body weight set point. It is the best biological explanation for set point that I have heard." And then Rafi asks a follow-up question: "How can you reset that set point to a lower one?"
That's the so how do you reset the set point to a lower one? That's basically why there's billions of dollars a year being spent in research in the treatment of obesity. And some of it has to do with hormones that become dysregulated, hormones that flow from organs like the intestinal tract and the stomach, the pancreas, even the fat cells around the organs. There's a multitude of hormones that are flowing constantly through the brain, telling you, like an orchestra of molecular music, basically, that plays constantly, that tells you whether or not it's time to eat or not. And then when it is time to eat, like how much to eat, how fast you eat, whether you eat something that is not even healthy for you, and so on, and whether you eat too much. These are things that are being largely driven by hormones in your body. And so the hormones that are involved in this set point are a big part of the research that's going on. In fact, the biggest breakthroughs in treating obesity so far in terms of medical treatments have come in replicating those hormones. Probably most people have heard of Saxenda. It's a drug that is an injectable medication, and it's actually a hormone. It's a modification of a human hormone called GLP-1. And the interesting thing is, people probably know that I often tell this analogy: say you're going to a restaurant and you're super hungry, and you sit down to eat, or you sit down and you're really hungry. You put off your dinner and now you're just so hungry, you're just famished. You look at the menu and the most delicious thing is what pops out at you. It's the pasta primavera. So you're going to get that, and it's probably like 2,500 calories or whatever. But it comes and you just like, oh, if it was me, I would just be like inhaling it. It would, delicious food like that when I'm super hungry, I just would like eat it like crazy. Now, what if that same situation occurred? You got to the restaurant, you're super hungry, but you're meeting a group of friends that you haven't seen for a while, and you get engaged in a really important conversation, and the meal comes. You realize that as 20 minutes go by, you've just been picking at your meal, but you kind of look down at that pasta primavera, and you've only had a few mouthfuls, but you feel quite satisfied. You feel quite full, and then you say to the waiter, like, could you please put this in a box and take it home? Like what's the difference? What happened there? Well, I'll tell you this, that satiety, or that sense of fullness, initially is something that comes from the stomach being full. And that's the problem, is a lot of the food in our culture is so high in calories and it's so delicious that you tend to eat it quickly, and it fills your stomach even partially, but you've eaten too many calories already. So the fullness doesn't really come. So if you eat quickly, that's a problem. If you eat very slowly, what happens is that high calorie food makes its way through the intestinal tract and starts to trigger little receptors farther down the small intestine, and that releases a hormone called GLP-1, and that ends up going to the brain, and it tells you that you've had enough to eat, even though you only ate a small amount of that high calorie pasta. It's probably about as much as you needed, and you stop your meal. So it's that delayed satiety effect that's really important. But when you've gained excessive weight, that effect starts to get blunted. And it might be partly just the habit of eating quickly. Like I'm a person that it's almost like I'm hardwired to eat my food very quickly. If I'm not careful, I'm sitting around a table, I'll finish my plate before other people have finished a quarter of their plate. That's just, it's almost like hardwired in my brain. I don't know if it's just bad habit or if it's like neurologically just wired there, but it is what it is. So I have to like really carefully slow myself down. And when you do that, you get some of this effect where you're going to get that delayed satiety. But it is sort of a deficiency in most people. They don't have enough of this hormone. And that's where that medication has come in to kind of override that. If you use the medication, it's like it restores that second, sort of that delayed satiety effect. So the set point is something that we can't do it by willpower alone. By losing weight, it doesn't change the set point. It actually just makes your body more inclined to gain weight back again. So it's you have to really be going about this in a strategic way. It isn't enough just to lose weight and then somehow you know how to keep going. You have to get some really serious help to keep the weight off. And a lot of it has to do with what we're talking about, developing a relationship with food that's going to be truly satisfying. And for me, it means, I have to eat enough that my stomach is full, because I still have that stomach that wants to feel full. And I do that by eating more vegetables. And if I have a smaller meal that's higher in calories, I'll add a big salad to it, or I might have a big bowl of soup. That's just something I've done since I was a very young man. And it's been my number one help in the long run, is eating more vegetables. I mean, a lot of vegetables.
No, only good can come from that. So yeah. Rosie, back to you in the chat box.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question from Michael Baidu. I wonder how the system that was built to get us to gain weight or eat daily worked for people before 1960, 1970, when less than 5% of the world's population was managing obesity or overweight. Today, 2.1 billion people have obesity and overweight issues, and of those, 800 million women represent 27% of the total population. More people struggle with this chronic disease and its mental health consequences than ever before. How did the easy access to food change the way we deal with obesity?
I think, there's so many factors in this, but I think the food industry played a huge role in this, in designing foods that were engineered to trigger the pleasure centers in the brain in a way that's really, I would call it largely unnatural. It's the difference in that there's something fundamentally different in the enjoyment you get from eating a food that's made from real ingredients, using for flavorings natural herbs and spices, than it is from food that's been engineered with various sort of chemicals and things that are there to trigger very sensual experiences that are sort of superficial. what we could say is that, I showed you that meal that, that I rated, West African style peanut pork, with green beans. It's something that has a kind of deliciousness that's just like, it's almost like an ecstatic experience. And yet, if you compared that to what it would be if you ate a burger and fries, there's something very different about that. It's like the enjoyment you get from eating something like that traditional food with traditional flavors, is like all of your cells, somehow you feel all your cells are celebrating. There's this celebration of joy that occurs when you eat something that's real. Whereas when you eat a burger, it's like eating something that's almost like an addictive drug that you're consuming. It's a different experience. When you haven't eaten that kind of food, like I don't eat much fast food, but from time to time, if I ever have a bite of, like say a store-bought pizza, or like a pizza shop pizza, it's like something else. There's some other receptors getting triggered, and something comes alive in me that's like, I don't think I could ever stop at one piece of pizza. It's like, I want to eat 3 pizzas now. There's something different. It's weird. It's like the flavors have been engineered to make it so that you don't have the same level of control, and you don't have the same kind of depth of enjoyment. Satiety, or that sense of satisfaction, is something that we need when we eat. And yet the satiety you get from eating engineered foods is a different kind of satiety. And it's hard to override that.
The contrast is so significant, right? You mentioned eating whole foods that are deliciously put together and you're satisfied and you feel so good. And then with these chemically engineered foods, most people identify with it being great so long as I'm eating it. But then once that last bite is gone, it's like, it doesn't feel good anymore. It's usually when people start to feel sick, or it ignites the hunt for more. It doesn't have that lasting effect. So we have a raised hand from Ragini. I think that's how you say it.
Ragini.
Ragini.
It's Ragini. Yeah. Dr. Lyon, I had a question. You said you love the vegetable, the vegetables in your daily meals, and I do too. I was actually raised quite vegetarian. But here's my question: is there a limit to the amount of vegetables you can have? For example, I love cauliflower, and I love having maybe a cauliflower pizza. But when I look and see how much maybe carbs there are in there, am I okay with eating as much as I want, or should I be limiting myself? Is there a limit to the number or the amount of vegetables you should or can eat in a day?
Well, I'd say, first of all, if you're talking about just eating cauliflower by itself,
No, just generally vegetables, yeah.
No limit at all, I would say. But oftentimes, if it's an ingredient like a cauliflower pizza, I remember someone brought a cauliflower pizza, and because you can buy them, I guess, at Costco or somewhere, a cauliflower pizza. And I looked at the ingredients, and it looked like cauliflower was a very minor part of what was in it. It wasn't that it was actually made from cauliflower. But if, so I think it all is relative to how much the vegetables really there. Now, that being said, one of the strategies that I use is to take an existing food and add a lot more vegetables to it. So that's a way to volumize the food with vegetables. That's a strategy that can be very useful. You can even take, say you could take carrots or sweet potatoes, and you can puree them and add them to foods like stews or things like that, and make them much healthier and more volumetric, without having to add any significant calories. So there's things like that. I don't think vegetables should be really limited. Now, if you're on a diet where you're working to, if you're working to lose weight, then you have to be mindful of calories, and starchy vegetables are going to have some calories. So you have to be, you have to eat those with certain proportions in mind. But when it comes to non-starchy vegetables, I kind of feel like the more the better. For me, like a salad might be like a bowl like this big, that. But it's what you put on it that's the thing. What you put on it and what you put in it. If you put, if you have a salad that's this big, and you add ingredients that are an extra 2,000 calories, well, you've kind of blown the purpose of it. But if you add, an appropriate amount of calorie containing ingredients, then that's perfectly fine. The vegetable doesn't really factor into the equation. It's just better for you overall. You know, for me, one of the things that I did to escape my ice cream addiction, and I was truly addicted to it every evening, you know, going down and gorging on ice cream. I hate to admit that. It was a long time ago. You know, I'm in my 60s now, so I'm reflecting on things from many years ago. But the way that I overcame my ice cream addiction was I began to, when I had that intense craving after dinner, I went to the refrigerator and I would pull out a bag of carrots and I would sit down and I would force myself to eat carrots, which are, you know, they're if you have a good carrot, they're pretty tasty. They were pretty good. So I got to the point where I would eat so many carrots to get to the point where I didn't feel like going downstairs and eating ice cream, that I turned quite orange. And and then when I got into medical school and I had to go work in the operating room, I would, after about 10 minutes, the sweat on my palms would turn my gloves, you know, latex gloves. It would be bright orange. It would be quite amusing. I must have had such high beta carotene levels that it was off the chart, because I would literally eat like a couple pounds of carrots a day. So for me, it was like either 2 pounds of carrots or like a quart of ice cream. Take a pick. So the lesser of two, I wouldn't call it evils in this case, but the huge amount of carrots kind of saved me there. And to this day, still in the evening, I have, like most people, evenings are a troublesome time where I would love to have the liberty of going and grabbing a bag of tortilla chips and just sitting down and watching Netflix all evening, eat the whole bag. But I know I really shouldn't do that. So I rely on mostly carrots and sometimes a big apple every evening. It's like the one thing that I give myself the liberty. I figure if I have one piece of fruit, or maybe, like a handful of carrots, it's something that my body needs anyway. It's not like I'm indulging in the evening eating snack foods.
Rosie, can we go back to the chat box? Do you have another question?
Yes, thank you. Sandy Voigt has a question. She says, I'm postmenopausal and weight loss is much more difficult. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, it is much more difficult. In our clinic, we have that would be our primary population that we work with in our clinic. And we have seen many women who are perimenopausal or postmenopausal do really well when it comes to their weight. But first of all, I never sort of counsel people about how to lose weight until I know their story, because sometimes an individual isn't ready for weight loss. They need to build a foundation first. They may have an emotional relationship with food that needs to be addressed in a way where they turn to healthier solutions than to food for finding comfort from distress. So, I don't want to sort of give a pat answer here, but I have to say that if you're working with someone and it is appropriate time to help them engage in weight loss, then we may have them follow a structured diet where they're eating very calorie controlled for a period of time, maybe using meal replacements. And it sounds contrary to what I've been talking about, but the fact is that weight loss, we look at it as an interval of it's like a temporary intervention. So for a period of so many weeks, we're going to change the rules and we're going to follow a plan to help you lose weight, because sometimes weight loss becomes a very necessary thing. And so, if weight loss is something that we want people to pursue, we follow a structured diet plan for a period of time. And then we have to make sure that they're ready to go back to eating in a way that's going to be sustainable.
So I think we have time for one more question, Rosie.
Okay, great. Thank you. There was some active conversation about this topic. So I'm merging this to the top of the list in terms of the last question. And it was regarding the comments around eating very quickly. The chat box, there was questions around, are there any recommendations that you have based on personal experience to help slow down the eating process?
I'd say really do as much reading as possible about the idea of mindful eating, because it really is about mindfulness. When you have a brain that's wired to eat quickly, which I think is probably mostly genetically conferred. It's something that's either genetically conferred or it's something that develops very early in our upbringing, so that it's very hard to change. And if you want to change that, the only way is to be very, very careful to eat in a mindful way. And that means, number one, really avoid eating when there's distractions such as television or internet. Don't bring the iPad to your table while you're eating, that kind of thing. And if you're going to be distracted, just be distracted with a good conversation. That's a better way to be distracted, because that tends to distract you away from your fork rather than sort of get you just sort of mindlessly eating. But in any case, the most important thing is to really learn the principles of mindful eating. And you're going to have to pull yourself back and do it over and over and over again. I have to admit that I think I'm hardwired to eat faster than anyone I've ever met. And yet, I've really seen a big change since I've been trying to, in my own life, and I have been applying the principles of mindfulness that I teach. I mean, I teach mindfulness courses. I should know better, but from time to time, I realize I've just sort of gobbled down my food, and it's something that I think is it's a thing you have to be kind to yourself, because you have to realize that these are not easy things. This is like, it's trying to learn a language when you're older in your life. You're never going to quite get it as good as someone that learned it when they were young. So I think it's a practice that has to be continually re-engaged in, and you start with the biggest things first. Don't eat in front of a TV show. Just really try to avoid that. If you're going to have a meal, make sure you're fully there. That's a big part of the concept that we're trying to talk about when it comes to the celebration of food. The food that would be part of a traditional culture would be a central part of a celebration that goes on every day when people sit around the table. And in many countries, they sit around the table and a meal might take 2 hours, and it's this time where people are talking and laughing and sharing, and and food is something that's indulged in very slowly, and it might even be very high calorie food. Like, you think of like the traditional French cuisine and how high calorie it is, and yet how traditionally in France there was very little obesity. And I think that's largely because of the way it's the food culture more than the type of food. The type of food was very obesogenic, but it was that they ate in a way where the food was coming out in small morsels, and they would eat it very slowly, and then they would feel satiety that would start to slowly kick in, so that they wouldn't overeat.
I think that's great advice as we enter into the lunch hour here in Ontario, that we all give it a shot. We sit down at our tables, we turn everything off and just commune with our food. We want to offer our sincere thanks, Michael, for generously giving us your time today. I would have to say my biggest takeaway is not so much focusing on weight loss, but more focusing on your relationship with food, and that it is in fact one of the most intimate relationships you will have. And so to take that time to foster a healthy relationship. Rachel, what's your biggest takeaway?
Oh, Sandra, you stole mine. I would dieting is definitely a very dirty word in my opinion. And so I really love the idea of actually focusing instead on having that, loving, nurturing relationship with food where the food loves you back. So that's going to be my measure. So thank you for that new perspective, Michael.
We hope that you have enjoyed the Eat, Play, Love Spotlight series, and we look forward to hosting you again in a couple of months. We're hoping to have the next series ready and teed up for you in June. While we're not charging you for these sessions, we would appreciate any donation that you can make by simply going to our website, and I believe that the link will show up in the chat box. Our collaborators, Raptors 905, have donated plus-size clothing for our community, and we will randomly pick 10 lucky winners on April 19th for the Raptors 905 prize pack. If you would like to get involved, and we would love to have you as part of the Obesity Matters community, please visit our website and follow us on social media for updates and resources. So for now, we'll say goodbye, everybody. Enjoy your lunch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.